Hello, and welcome to Perinatal Wellbeing episode number 7. On today's episode, I interview Sascha, who I met through PSI's Peer Mentor program last year. Sascha is a mom to her 2-year-old son and lives with her husband in New Jersey. Sascha experienced postpartum anxiety after the birth of her first child, and she shares her story with us, what her recovery looked like for her, and what having a baby during a pandemic has been like. We touch on so many different, really important points that I think everyone will take something from this episode. And just to be aware, we do discuss fertility struggles, intrusive thoughts, anxiety. We mention birth trauma and grief. Hi, Sascha. Thanks so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So I will give the audience a bit of background and just let them know that we met through Postpartum Support International's Peer Mentor program.
Yes.
Yeah. And so do you want to share with people, that you reached out for support through that program?
Yeah. So, a couple of months after my son was born, so my son is 2 now. So that might be helpful. So I'm a little bit out from it now, but a couple months after he was born, I started to have some postpartum anxiety struggles, and I didn't know where to go for help. And I just started Googling, and I found Postpartum Support International, and they have a mentor program where you can email, you tell a little bit about yourself, and they match you with someone in the same time zone as you
Yes.
to talk with, who's, been a parent for a while and went through this and can help.
Yeah, and I think that program is so valuable, and that's why we kind of, wanted to share about it and just share that it is a resource out there. And so I will put in the show notes a link for people to check that out. Check out Postpartum Support International's website. They have free online groups as well that people can access on a weekly basis, which is pretty fantastic too.
Yeah, it's you might get really lucky and match with someone that you keep talking with even after the program's over.
Yes, absolutely. And so, just for a bit of background, you are in New Jersey.
Yes.
Yes. And like you said, your son is 2.
Yeah.
And wow, time goes fast, doesn't it?
Time flies.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so, how about you share with us a bit about your story in terms of coming into parenthood, your kind of journey to parenthood, and what that looked like afterwards?
Yeah. So I was not someone who thought my whole life, oh, I have to be a mother.
Right.
My partner, my husband, he wanted to be a father, and I think he was going to make a wonderful father. And we ended up having some fertility struggles, unexplained. We went through everything. They didn't know why. So what I'm trying to say is this was a very planned pregnancy. We worked hard to have a baby. And yeah, so we were really excited when it happened. And I had a wonderful pregnancy, actually loved being pregnant. It was, which I know is kind of annoying for some people to hear.
No, that's okay.
I loved it. It was a wonderful
Yeah.
experience for me, just to see like what my body was capable of doing.
Yeah.
And I had a very wonderful birth experience. I
Lovely.
didn't have like any significant birth plan, just which I know is like really in nowadays, but
Yeah.
I did know I wanted to have an unmedicated birth if possible,
Right.
which I did. So it was
Okay.
an incredible experience. Uh,
Wow. And can I ask you, did you feel like your care providers, were they really on board with that? Were they really supportive of your wishes?
no,
Wow.
they were not unsupportive.
Okay.
However, when it came to the moment, my water broke, and it happened to be in the middle of the night. So I
Right.
delivered at a teaching hospital in New York City. So
Okay.
when I got there, there was no like attending around. It was all residents, and
Right.
they don't want you to do anything off the book. They're very nervous.
Yeah.
Um, I happened to be group B strep positive, so I needed antibiotics. And I actually, I was very far along when I went to the hospital. I had been several weeks walking around having contractions and
Oh, wow.
dilated and everything. So everyone was like very nervous about me doing anything. They made me labor in bed, which I didn't want to do, on my back
Mm,
with an IV,
right.
everything, which I understand they were concerned and it's all coming from a good place, but it is more difficult to labor on your back in bed without an epidural. So,
Absolutely.
uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, so
I
that it was some challenge, but I was very fortunate to have a very lovely delivery. So,
Good, good. How can I ask, like, how did that feel for you as someone who, thought, okay, I'm going into this. I don't have a specific strict birth plan of how exactly I want this to look like. However, I do want an unmedicated birth. And, it sounds like being able to move around, to be able to labor in the way that felt as comfortable for you as possible. What was that like on an emotional level when they wanted to keep you in the bed, lying down on your back with an IV?
it's a really good question. At first, it didn't really bother me because I wasn't having, my water had broken, but I wasn't having very intense contractions. So
Right.
I was fine just sort of listening to them. And
Mhm.
then when the contraction picked up, I honestly don't think I was even thinking about it anymore. It was so
Right.
intense that my mind was just on like, when can I push and get this baby out?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And how long was that intensity
Mm.
for you? How long did that last?
It wasn't very long. I think it was only about 2 hours from when I had
Okay.
really intense contractions till the baby was out. But I will
Okay.
say something that was kind of funny to me was
Yeah.
um, I was having these intense contractions. And if you've ever had a baby, I don't know about with an epidural because I haven't had that experience, but unmedicated, when you feel the need to push, you have to push. There's no choice. And
Yeah.
the residents are like, don't push, don't push. We don't have your doctor's not here yet. Don't push. And I'm like, there's no choice. I don't care who
Yeah.
delivers the baby. I'm pushing.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Sasha, you know what is so funny? And we have actually haven't talked about this. I had the same experience.
Really? No, I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so same thing. Actually, the nurse didn't believe me that I was ready to push. And I did have an epidural, but I was like, there's a baby coming out of there. Like, I can definitely feel something happening. Like, I really need to go to the bathroom or push. And she's
Yeah.
like, no, no, it's your first baby. If you start pushing now, you're going to be pushing for 2 hours. I'm like, I don't know. And then so she left, wouldn't call my doctor.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Refused to call my doctor. And I said to my husband, I'm like, you need to go to get a nurse right now. Like, I'm going to push this baby out. My husband is lovely and very soft spoken and
Mhm.
wasn't coming back with a nurse. So I asked my friend who was very outspoken, I need you to get a nurse.
Now.
Like, yeah, right now. So she goes, got the job done, gets a nurse to come back. No, no, you're not ready.
Mhm.
Literally just like looks between my legs. And she's like, oh, the baby's crowning. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, so I guess I'll say also, I'm a medical professional. So
Mhm.
I fully support medical professionals, but it's just
Yep.
funny how sometimes, despite all of the training and all of the experience, you just never know, right?
Yeah. I see how helpful the nurses were and, obviously an integral part of our care. And also, though, that feeling of not being heard and not being listened to, I think it's important to, acknowledge that that does happen a lot,
Yeah,
especially in labor and delivery, right? Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. It's your first baby. You don't know what it feels like. Or you have an epidural. You can't feel anything.
right.
I can feel that there's a baby coming out of my vagina. Like, that's not something you miss.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So so the actual delivery itself, how was that?
Um, Intense. I don't know another word
Mm-hmm.
for it. It was like
Mm-hmm.
the most intense experience of my life. My husband was super supportive. He was, I was like, I just remember being so thirsty and sweaty from laboring and everything. And I don't know if this is a thing in Canada, but nothing, you can't eat or drink or anything during labor, just in case. So
Yes.
he's like ice chips for me and saying words of affirmation that we had been practicing. And he was very supportive, which was nice. And then obviously just like the best feeling when the baby came out, the first thing I said was, "Is he okay?"
Yeah.
And yeah, it was incredible.
Oh, that's lovely. And so it sounds like you felt really connected to your husband.
Yes, it was. I don't think I could have done it without him being there. You know, in those last moments, you're just like, I can't do this for another second.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really helpful to have someone there by your side.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to acknowledge, how helpful it is to have someone there, to have your support person, someone you trust and you can rely on. It's not always our partners. However, I think it can be that beautiful connecting time in our lives where we're really like, okay, wow, this person who's my partner in life is really supportive, really taking care of me. I think that can be a wonderful experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good.
So then the rest of my stay it was pretty uneventful.
Right.
Went home. My mother-in-law, who is wonderful, was up
Yeah.
there and came home with us and helped us get the baby home and get settled. And I was fortunate. I didn't have any problems starting to breastfeed, just
Good.
latched, fed, and yeah, everything seemed to be going fine. And then the baby blues started,
Okay.
which I, of course, had heard about, but I didn't
Yeah.
understand, I think, how intense they could feel.
Right.
And, I did have quite intense baby blues. I was crying most of the time for the first week or so. Um, Not really about anything at all,
Yep.
just crying,
Yes.
very emotional.
Yeah.
And then things seem to sort of get better after that. You know how they tell you they last a couple of weeks with the hormone shifts and then things get better. And that's what happened for me. And I didn't really think about it.
Right. Yeah. And can I ask you, during that kind of baby blues time, do you remember, or do you feel comfortable sharing, what are some thoughts that you remember from that time?
Very hard for me. I feel like it's a lot of a haze. A lot of the first months of my son's life are very hazy for me. Um,
Absolutely.
I can't think of any specific thoughts that I was having. It was just
Yeah.
mostly feeling overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and anything would make me cry. Happy, sad, it didn't matter what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what did it feel like for you when the baby blues kind of lifted, like you said, that couple weeks? What was that like when you realized, oh, I'm not as sad? How was that for you?
I felt relieved. A lot of the time, I felt like I was having not necessarily trouble connecting to my baby, but there was something missing. I couldn't put my finger on it. But when those kind of tears lifted and I was able to kind of soak in those moments with my baby, I felt relieved mostly.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason why I ask is because it's important for us to realize that this happens. It's common. There's stats that can tell us up to 80% of new parents can experience the baby blues. That's a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And yeah, when we feel really sad, we feel like kind of this dark cloud, then it is hard to connect with our baby. And we don't always feel like super in love with our baby, like the fairy tales kind of say we are, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is although like I had heard of baby blues and people talk about them,
Yeah.
as one of the first of my like close friends to have a baby, I hadn't really spoken to a lot of people firsthand experience about what it's like to be a new mom, except for my mother-in-law, but she was a little bit far out from that. And I do
Yeah,
trust her, but it's not exactly the same as,
absolutely.
yeah, your peers.
Yeah, someone who's maybe like just gone through it not so
Right.
long ago. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. And even thinking of like, oh yeah, I've heard of the baby blues, but we don't necessarily think, oh, it's going to happen to me, right?
Right. And or that
Mhm.
it's going to be like so consuming, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, so intense, like you were
Right.
saying, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so then it lifted for you and you felt relieved, and then you were able to connect with your son a bit more, being more present with him.
Yes. And then I wasn't the first one to notice when I started having some postpartum anxiety type symptoms. Now, looking back, they're quite obvious to me, but
Yep.
my husband is the first one who noticed and
Okay.
brought it to my attention and
Mhm.
asked me to get help. I do have a history of anxiety in the past and eating disorders in the past. So, my husband later shared with me he was on the lookout for these symptoms. And so I feel quite fortunate that he felt comfortable sharing with me. And
Yeah.
also looking back now, I wasn't super receptive, but I was receptive
Mhm.
enough to get help. So looking
Right.
back, I'm quite grateful about that.
Good. Can I ask, what was that like for you to hear that your husband was on the lookout for these signs and symptoms?
I wish he would have told me sooner that it was a
Okay.
concern. I hadn't put it on my radar, which was probably naive of me, but I was just having such a wonderful pregnancy. I wasn't
Yeah.
about it.
Right.
And um, I mostly just felt thankful that he was there to help me.
Right. Right. And so what kind of time frame was this postpartum that he noticed?
Yeah, I would say, like I said, it's all really hazy for me, but
Absolutely.
it was around 3 or 4 months old when my
Okay.
that also happens to be the time. Uh, I should mention my son was born in February of 2020, so he was
Okay.
born right before the pandemic started, and then
Yeah.
the pandemic really hit off when he was about 1 month old.
Right.
And then I was going back to work in a hospital around the same time that the postpartum symptoms started. So it was kind of
Wow.
all at once.
Yes.
Um, also looking back, it was a time when my baby's sleep was changing, and that was really a challenging point for me, a big trigger for me. So,
Okay. And it's interesting because a lot of people say that. I mean, generally it's either like sleep or eating,
mm,
right? One of the two. And you might not know this, but like again, hindsight is 2020. Looking back, do you know why there's any particular reason why it was sleep that you kind of attached to?
yes,
Okay.
I have always myself been a big sleeper. I
Right.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before. I used to
Yeah.
sleep like 9, 10 hours a night. So even before the baby was born, I wasn't worried about his sleep and what was going to happen and how I was going to function and all of these things. I do think this was a big problem for me. I got really wrapped up in social media and
Okay.
looking at advice on social media and
Yeah.
needing to do exactly what these people said, and that would fix it. And if I don't do it that way, it's not perfect, it's not right, it's not going to work. And looking back, I do feel quite robbed of a lot of my time with my son then. Yeah, I know we've spoken about this before. It's hard for me still.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's 9 years for me, and it's still hard for me.
Yeah.
In terms of no, get I don't cry anymore when I think about that time. However, I still feel the sadness, and I
Mhm.
still feel like I missed out on a good 6 months
Yeah.
of my baby's first year, you
Yeah.
know? And that's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Thank you so much for mentioning the social media,
Yeah.
because I truly see what a massive impact, and mostly negative, I will say that, I'm throwing that out there, on, myself, friends, clients, especially when we're dealing with anxiety. So, can you tell me a bit more about that, of how, it wasn't helpful for you?
social media is so curated
Yeah.
and very prescriptive and like little blurbs. So you're not getting the whole picture.
Yeah.
No one's saying every baby is different. Let me rephrase that. They are saying every baby is different, but if you do it my way, your baby won't be different and they'll sleep all night.
Yes.
That's what they're telling. That's what I feel like they're telling you. If you do it my way,
Yeah.
your baby will sleep.
Right. And to someone who loves sleep,
Right.
who is experiencing anxiety, even though you weren't really connecting to that yet, like knowing that that was going on. And okay, my baby, is struggling with sleep right now. We're struggling with sleep for whatever reason. I bet that sounded really magical. Like, oh my gosh, this person can fix my sleep, or this product, or this sleep course, or whatever it was, could fix my sleep. That probably sounded amazing.
Yes. And also looking back, I'd like to say, I actually don't think there was anything wrong with my son's sleep,
Right.
which
Okay.
is a big deal. I think he happened to be a baby who liked to nurse a lot and frequently.
Yep.
And during the day, I had no problems. We just did that and it worked for us. He wanted
Yeah.
to do the same thing at night.
Right.
And he was like 3 or 4 months old. And looking back,
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything wrong. But at the time, I was very tired and looking back, very anxious. And yeah, it was like, oh, if I just do these things and if I do them perfectly, then everything will be fine.
Right. And I'm gonna guess that also going back to work at that point added to the pressure because I need to sleep at night so I can function at work during the day.
Right.
Right. Yes. And so, I hate to say it, but maternity leave, paid maternity leave in Canada, we do have up to 18 months now that you
Yeah.
can take if you want to. And I think that that is really important where we see those types of things. Of course, people struggle with sleep and anxiety and all those things, but not having that added layer. I personally can't imagine when I was going through my anxiety to get dressed and like to shower and look presentable for work, not just like to be clean at home in my, jogging pants. I I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah. We had, so I took maternity leave. I technically got 1 day of paid maternity leave, but I used a combination of resources, short-term disability, PTO. New York has a New York paid family leave, FMLA. So it wasn't
Yeah.
all full pay. Some of it was partial pay, some of it was unpaid, but I did take off about 12 weeks total before
Right.
um, and I will say I was pumping at work, which added more stress for me. Pumping was a stressful situation for me.
Okay. And this might sound like an obvious question, but maybe how much did that add to the fatigue of like physically also pumping at work?
Yeah, I think in the moment I wasn't cognizant about it. I was like so obsessed with pumping as much as I could at work and not wanting my baby not to breastfeed on the days I had off. I worked shifts, 12-hour shifts. So I would be gone, wouldn't see him. So he wouldn't nurse when I was at work that whole day. So I think I was so consumed in the postpartum symptoms that it wasn't even on my radar that all of these things were exhausting me.
And it's not just one thing, it's all these like big major things. And so those add up to create, really difficult situation.
Yes. And I guess along with this, I know you've already had an episode about this, but I did
Mm.
experience intrusive thoughts. They were
Right.
extremely terrifying for me. I did not know about intrusive thoughts at all before I experienced them. So when I started having them, I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was going to hurt my baby. I thought they're going to take my baby away from me. I'm a bad mother. Um, and these would peak for me in the middle of the night. So and my husband didn't know about them. So I felt very alone and very afraid.
And in the middle of the night, so you were awake. So was it like you were nursing your baby? Right.
So it's all kinds of a blur, but a lot of them I would have when I was coming out of sleep often. So I was kind of in like a half awake, half asleep phase. My intrusive thoughts for me, without going into too much detail, were very visual. I didn't have really necessarily a thought. I had lots of pictures flashing, which was, like I've said, as you can tell, I'm choking up a little bit. They were very scary for me. I still feel fearful of them. I have
fearful of having intrusive thoughts again, or fearful of what you thought of?
both.
Okay.
I still feel a lot of guilt around, even though I do know now it was not intentional thoughts or anything like that. I still feel bad about them, about having them. I feel a lot of the times I still have some, I don't know what to call them, like flashback type symptoms where I'm like back there. I'm not actually having an intrusive thought, but I'm like back there.
Yes. And I think, that definitely speaks to the fact that there's, maybe still some processing to do around, what happened and having that experience. Right. And I think that it's hard to do that. We can't really process that while we're in the thick of it because, we're going through it, lack of sleep, we're taking care of a newborn, you are going back to work, pumping, like all the things. Right.
Yes.
And we need like that processing can happen later on when we, kind of are maybe not in the thick of that newborn baby stage. Right.
Yeah.
But that takes time and work, and it's hard to do. Right.
Yes. And I will say, so around this time that my husband pointed some of the things he had noticed out, I found Postpartum Support International, and that's how I found you. I also had already gotten a therapist and was speaking with a therapist. And so I will say, although I'm still struggling with these things, it has become immensely better. I have skills now to deal with them. I can take myself out of those moments. I know what to do. I know what my triggers are. I enjoy my baby. I'm not in a haze.
Yes.
So I do think all of the resources, have made obviously a huge difference in my life.
Right. And also understanding, like you said, I was afraid to tell people. I was afraid that my baby would be taken away and that kind of stuff. And that does stop people from getting help. What do you think for you was helpful in saying, okay, I have these fears and also I still want to reach out for help?
Well, I have to say, I don't know that this is very helpful, but I was afraid, deeply afraid that I was going to hurt him, and I was a bad mother. And I felt if he would be safer without me, if I talked to someone and they felt that he was unsafe with me, that I would do that because I love my son more than anything in the whole world. And all I want for him is to be safe and cared for. And even then, I was terrified that someone would tell me that. So the first time I talked to my therapist, who is wonderful, and she told me, I don't think you're going to hurt your baby. I think you're a wonderful mother for realizing that these great thoughts are crazy. And that's a good thing. If you didn't think these were crazy, there would be a problem.
Yes, that's when we start worrying as therapists. Yeah.
So, I think that's, honestly what made me reach out. And then,
Good. Absolutely. Right. And it's okay, right? That was the reason that for you was helpful because it got you to where you needed to go. Right.
Yeah.
And then able to hear from other people that actually I'm not a danger to my baby and I'm doing exactly what he needs in terms of getting help for myself so that I can be as present with my baby as possible.
Yes. And I will say my therapist, like very early on, she sent me like this one sheet page that was like, I wish I could remember more about it, but it was like an infographic. It was like very quick about intrusive thoughts and how they're common and how you're not going to hurt your baby, and all of that was on there. And just like seeing it written down from like a reputable source, I was just like, took like a deep breath of relief. Like, I think it's going to be okay eventually.
Yes, yes, this validation that like, okay, this doesn't mean that I'm going to hurt him. This doesn't mean I'm a bad mom.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, I will say that again, the book by Karen Kleiman, Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts, I now started to buy it for people who are pregnant. And I say, here you go, have this book. It's wonderful, because it just validates the fact that all new parents have anxiety. Most new parents, if not all, have some type of intrusive thought, right, around baby safety. And it is so jarring for our nervous system, right? But I think half the battle is like when we don't judge ourselves for it, we can access the coping just a little bit quicker.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So the intrusive thoughts, did they start kind of when your husband was noticing the symptoms 3-4 months, or did they kind of start afterwards?
That's a really good question. I don't remember.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. I don't remember.
Yeah, that's okay. And so you mentioned kind of they were really coming in for you in the middle of the night. And I remember that time as so isolating, like just feeling like literally the whole world is asleep and I'm all alone, pumping or trying to feed the baby or whatever it was. And it just felt that much worse. Was it like that for you?
Yes. And I do think that's where a lot of, back to the social media thing, I would then feel alone and like hook on to whatever I saw that would help. And looking back, I wish I would have just trusted my own instincts, which were to just feed my baby and go back to sleep and not try all of these other shenanigans to try and go back to sleep, or whatever. And, if I could go back in time, that's what I wish I would have done. But it's a lot easier when you're not in the moment.
Absolutely, right? Hindsight's 2020. And I think though that is so powerful because you still have a lot of parenting years ahead of you, right? And so how do you think that kind of feeling and concept of, I wish I had trusted myself, like listened to myself. I knew what worked for my baby and me. I want to do more of that. How do you think that will serve you? How does it serve you now and going forward as a mom?
I think it has made a very big difference in my anxiety, particularly.
Right.
To just go with what's working for us more. I don't follow any accounts now on social media to do with parenting or mothering or anything like that for my own mental health. If someone tells me about something that they think is wonderful, I said, that's great. I'm sure it works for you, but I have to stay off of that for my own well-being. I have a great time with my son now. I would say since he was, just back up a little bit. I would say since that was when he was about 3 or 4 months old, when it was at its worst.
Right.
I would say by the time he was around 8 to 9 months old, I was feeling out of that fog and, able to enjoy him more and feel like I'm remembering things better and, all of that stuff. So I think that's when I really started to shift and trust myself more and do more of what felt right for me. And it did make a difference. And then on top of that, I've started to, instead of turning to social media if I don't know what to do, or if I want advice, going to people that I trust for advice, like you, my mother-in-law, my therapist, or a lot of my friends now have children, talking to people directly instead if I do want advice or help.
Right. And being able to ask for what you need, like, and I have a wonderful friend who we kind of will say that at the beginning of a conversation, like, I really need your advice. Or we'll say, I don't need your advice today. I just need you to listen,
Wonderful.
Absolutely. And so how does that feel for you to be able to turn to people in real life, people who you trust, and say, hey, I need some advice, or I don't know what, this toddler stage is, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah.
How does that for you?
Yeah. So I've never been someone who's afraid to ask for help or admit that they're wrong. I've always been fine with that. So I think that's another sign that I was really deep into something, difficult when I wasn't doing that. Because I'm happy to talk and get advice from other people and hear. And also when I'm in a better state of mind, happy to say, thanks for that advice, take it in, take pieces of it, and move on from there.
Yes, absolutely. Being able to integrate that in a way that works for you, for your son, for your family, for how your family structure is set up.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that is, so helpful when we can say, okay, I have these people in my life that I trust that I can go to instead of, social media or Google, because you can find a million different answers to fit like every possible scenario. And how do you go through that information, right? It's impossible.
Yeah.
Absolutely overwhelming. And I think it just takes us further and further away from our values.
Yes, exactly. And you talk about values a lot, and I really connect to that, because I do think all of those things were taking me away from my values. And then when I was able to come back to my own values, it just made all the difference for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay. So, you were going through this really, really difficult time and things started to shift and, kind of that fog lifting. And so can you tell us a bit more about how did that actually happen? Like, how did that shift happen for you?
A lot of talking to my therapist,
Yeah.
mostly talking to my husband. I wasn't ready to talk. I honestly still don't talk to a lot of other people about what I went through, but opening up more to my husband especially was helpful, to have another person to go to and working through it together. Mostly talking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like letting it out, right?
Yeah.
And what did talking do, letting out that piece of your story and those things that you experienced, what did that do for the anxiety that was there?
Well, I think it mostly was just a place for me to let out the anxiety, like literally word vomit out the anxiety.
Yeah.
And then also learn skills from my therapist, about what to do in those moments where if I am having an intrusive thought or feeling overwhelmed or anxious, like things that I can do. Just specifically, one thing that is still very helpful for me is I just know I need to take a moment a lot of the time. And, everyone tells you it's okay to put the baby down. And for me, that was really tough for me because I was almost, and still am sometimes, like overly sensitive now to being there for him and connecting physically with him.
Yeah.
And, to say that it's okay to still put him down. And then my thing is I like to draw triangles in my head, which sounds silly, but it's
No.
concentrate on. So I'll draw triangles in my head and then match my breathing with that and then go back and pick him up. And oftentimes I wouldn't leave the room because that was too hard for me.
Right.
But yeah.
Wow. That sounds like a really beautiful way that you took that coping skill and those ideas, from therapy, and then again, integrated to your life and to your level of comfort, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to help me to leave the room and not be in the same room as him. That's going to cause me more anxiety.
Right.
So I'm going to stay in the room, but physically I can put him down and then take that moment to engage in this grounding skill, this coping skill to help me in this very moment. And then I can pick him back up and, kind of connect with him and help regulate my nervous system.
Exactly.
Amazing. Amazing. And so then was it kind of like just doing those things over and over every day, like in the moment when you needed to?
Yes. And, I don't know when the severe, like intrusive thoughts stopped. They just stopped. And I'm not sure why or what happened. They just stopped happening. And when they stopped happening, the anxiety got a lot better.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Which makes sense, right?
Right.
Yeah. Good, good.
Also, now that my son's a bit older, I was not comfortable with bed sharing when he was younger, but now that he's older, we do a lot more bed sharing. And that works for us. There's a lot of shame talking about it still, I feel. At least here in the States, it's still like if you tell people like this, it can be difficult sometimes, but it works for our family. It's increased all of our sleep. And I think that has helped a lot as well.
Right, right. Absolutely. Right. Especially for someone who likes a lot of
Sleep.
sleep, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm the same. There's no shame in that.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And that's so interesting because before I had kids, I was like, no, I'm never going to bring my baby into the bed. I'm not going to bed share because I need my sleep and I don't want the baby to get used to it and yada, yada, yada.
Right.
And then I had a kid.
Yeah.
And then reality set in. And I was like, it was probably like day one. And I was so tired. I was like, oh, you can just come into bed with me because I'm not getting up.
Yeah.
And so began our bed sharing journey.
Exactly. Yeah.
And again, that worked for us. He, like my first one, all three of my kids, thank goodness, slept so well. And it was like I was able to feed them and then we just fell right back asleep. And I would keep like a diaper and wipes. And like when I was formula feeding, I kept like the to-go holder, the formula holder. And the bottle with water.
Mix it
and
right
then
there.
yes, I would just change his diaper, mix the bottle, feed him the bottle, and we would fall back asleep. It was a magical time in my life. So, again, I think that importance of doing what works for your family,
Yes.
your baby, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. And so what helped you? Because sometimes it can be obviously really hard when we have a baby, a young baby, and we kind of have to do a bit of extra work to take care of ourselves. For example, when we're experiencing postpartum anxiety or, these intrusive thoughts that are very scary and almost debilitating. What kept you going in like doing that extra work to take care of yourself?
It was all about my son still, which I think, it was just that I wanted to be the best mom that I could be for him. And I was afraid that my postpartum anxiety would be detrimental for him. And so it started a lot with me focusing on what I can do to help myself to help him.
Right. And it sounds like that worked for you.
Yeah.
And do you feel like it's still the same focus now, like in terms of keeping up with how you take care of yourself and your mental health?
I think it's just become more routine now.
Right.
it's just something that I do, like brush your teeth. It's something that I need to do to take care of myself.
Right. Yes. So it's just that doing it over and over, it's become routine. This is an important part of my life. This keeps me well, just
Yes.
like brushing my teeth keeps me from having cavities.
Right.
Right.
I tell myself, keep your teeth healthy and strong so you can eat your food.
Yes, exactly. There you go. Absolutely. So what then kind of coming out of that fog and, that shift in yourself and in, your experience with motherhood, how did that progress and continue kind of, until where you're at right now? What's that been like?
Yeah, I would say since like around 8 to 9 months, things have
Mhm.
been pretty good.
Yeah.
Like I said, I still have some flashback moments. They don't debilitate me anymore. I know what to do.
Good.
Um, and they've been happening less and less often.
Yeah.
I still feel a lot of sadness, like we spoke about, like I missed out. And it's hard for me to look at pictures from when he was really young still. But uh, it was just his second birthday, and I was
Yeah.
looking at pictures from when he was born, and it was joyous. And so
Oh,
that was a big
lovely.
win for me to just focus
Good.
on that like happiness.
Yes,
Yeah, I get to enjoy my son now, and
absolutely.
it's awesome.
Absolutely. And I think what's so important in that piece is you did go through a really, really terrible time, and you had healing and you've had recovery, and you are now in this place where you feel well and you're able to manage your mental health and, you know, be so connected to your son and
Yeah.
enjoy parenthood.
Yes. And I feel very fortunate that I did get help. I do think changed, everything for me. And like I love playing with my son. He's so
Yeah.
much fun. And
Yeah.
I would have gotten, when you're in that fog, you don't feel the same peaks and lows even. For me anyway, I should say. So yeah, it's
Definitely. Yeah, it's being, you said the word being present and really truly experiencing the reality of the moment,
Mhm.
right? Because that anxiety, when it comes in, it actually a lot of times like tells us a lot of things that are not true,
Yes,
right? About
yes,
ourselves, about our experience, about, just what's kind of going on around us.
yes.
And so we're not in touch with ourselves, but then we're not also in touch with the people around us and, our babies.
Yeah.
Do you mind telling me, you said his second birthday, you were able to look back on those pictures and experience joy. Can you tell us what his first birthday was like for you?
Trying to think back.
Mm.
Well, it was very fun because we have some family nearby that throw him birthday parties, it's really
Oh,
fun. It's just our
lovely.
COVID, so it's just our small little group. But
Yes.
um, I didn't look at pictures back on his first birthday. I know that much. I didn't even
Right.
try to look. Um,
Okay.
I remember feeling a lot more sadness about missing out on what I feel like was missing out on several months of his life. And this time I was able to focus more of just being in the moment. And then, briefly being able to look back and say, like, oh, I looked at them with my son. Oh, you were born on this day. And look at how tiny you were. And now
Yeah.
you're so big. And yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's lovely. I think that's something that personally really surprised me about, I felt like, okay, I did all this work. I went to therapy every week with my baby, in person, and it was like a lot. It felt like a lot. And, I was feeling so much better, and I was able to be present and like feeling well. And then I was discharged from the program that I was in because it's, up to a year postpartum. And then his birthday hits, and I have no supports, like in
Mm,
terms of professional support. And we didn't talk about his birthday coming up, and bam. Okay, I'm happy that he was born. And also that was the beginning of a really difficult time in my life.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough one to
Yeah.
reconcile, because we want to celebrate our babies and we're so happy that they're here and that finally we're better and like connected to them. And then also this birthday is going to happen for the rest of my life. And potentially every year there's that reminder of that really tough time.
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
see how that would be really challenging. For me, I think I'm able to separate his birthday a little bit more because I don't I associate my day of labor and everything as being really wonderful. So
Yes.
I'm able to separate it a little bit more.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah, I think, which is a gift, right?
Yes.
I definitely see that more with people that have traumatic deliveries,
Right.
difficult deliveries, where that can be really hard, especially kind of those near misses where, they potentially something very bad, a lot worse could have happened. And so it's that same exact day is
Right.
like, my baby was born and I almost died. Like that's
Very
really
true.
difficult.
Yes.
Yeah,
I can only imagine that would be very challenging.
absolutely. Yeah. But like yourself, like even like I said, my son's 9, and just like looking back on photos, even of my older kids
Mm.
at that time, I'm like, I don't even really remember them.
Yeah.
I don't remember them at all in
Yeah.
that time frame. And that is sad,
It is. Yes. And
Yeah.
like, anytime I hear anyone else talk about it, I'm just like, I'm sorry. Like, like I don't even know what else to say because I can feel that pain
Yeah.
and it sucks.
It does suck. And it's like, we can't change it, right? We
Yeah.
can't go back and change it. So it's like, we're helpless in that sense. But I think this sharing of stories
Yeah.
and, sharing of our pain, putting it out there in the world, it can be scary. But I think it also can be so healing for us and other people who, people who've already messaged me. This podcast is like a baby. And, people have messaged me like, wow, thanks so much for that story, because I really resonated to that story. And I had that experience, but I never heard anyone talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
That's
know?
kind of why, I was really nervous to talk to you on here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't talk about it with a lot of people, but I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that if there is someone like me who didn't know about any of this or wasn't on their radar, and they're just like in the middle of the night Googling,
Yes. Yes. Listen
that
to a podcast.
maybe they'll come across something like this instead.
Yes, I hope so. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
And so another big piece of this journey, which you touched on, was, okay, your son was born about a month before the pandemic really hit.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that experience of, okay, you were able to have him before, I guess, a lot of those restrictions came in, but then how did the pandemic affect your recovery? I mean, your experience coming into parenthood?
Yeah. So I was now looking back, extremely fortunate. Had him at such a lucky time. Um, there were no restrictions when I gave birth. So I can't even imagine if there were what would have happened. So
Yeah.
I feel so much pain for those women that had to deal with that. But yeah, so I was very lucky, had a normal experience for the whole first month. Like I said, my mother-in-law, she lives in Texas and we live in New York. We lived in New York at the time. So she actually stayed with us for like 3 weeks, which was
Wow.
really
Yes.
lucky.
Yeah.
And then she left. And then my mom was able to come for a few days, but then actually the pandemic was like starting while she was visiting us and she had to leave because everyone was like, didn't know what was happening. We lived in Brooklyn. So we were like in the, whatever, middle of all of the chaos.
Right.
And yeah, it got really scary, honestly. to have a newborn, not knowing what was happening. We didn't leave. I didn't see a single other person for like, except for my husband and my baby, for about 2 months. We were afraid to even walk outside because no one knew what was happening.
Yeah.
And in Brooklyn, you can't walk outside without running into people. It's not like a neighborhood where you could just like be in your yard or whatever.
Yeah.
So we actually walked the baby on the roof of our building and in the parking lot.
Oh, wow.
Because I was like, we have to get outside, and
Yeah.
I wear him and walk around. And yeah, we weren't able to get some groceries for a while. People were sending me baby Tylenol from Texas because we couldn't get any. So it was like pretty scary there for a little while. And then also obviously very isolating because no one could come. So it was just the three of us. I will say one of the most wonderful gifts the pandemic has given us is my husband then was able to work from home. He only was going to be home with us for a week. And he was now has been home almost the entirety of this 2 years.
Right.
So he got so much more time with our son than he would have ever been able to get, which was truly a blessing. But then after maternity leave, like I said, I worked in a hospital. So I hadn't gone anywhere. And then I got on a subway and went to a hospital to work,
what was that like?
I was having some panic attacks before I went back about even going outside. So we did a lot of practice, just even going outside. And then when I got to the hospital, it was like a very bizarre experience because all of them had been working through the pandemic, right?
Right.
In like this worst case scenario. So, and I was fortunate to miss almost all of it on maternity leave.
Right.
I would show up and everyone's like acting like it's not weird to be there, like talking to people. I'm like sanitizing my hands and everything I touch, like every half a second. And they're looking at me, I'm nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like talking to people and I'm like, it was just very bizarre.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, it just sort of became the new normal, kind of like everybody else.
So, when we talk about a village of support and how through the pandemic, it's been way harder to do that.
Yeah, we've had basically, our family has been there electronically and visit when the pandemic got better as much as they could, but we've been essentially alone the entire time. And with this new wave that happened, my son's older now and we put him in school or daycare, we call it school. And it was really tough trying to decide what to do. I know a lot of people were going through that, what to do. He is at an age where it's important, but he's still very little. So we did pull him out of school for as long as we could in the beginning of this next wave or whatever. But we were paying for school and then also paying for my sister-in-law, fortunately, to come and watch him when I was at work. And I switched my schedule around. So I was working primarily weekends and, kind of doing all of this to make it work. And I think that's just added a whole nother layer of complexity.
Absolutely. I think it adds a layer, absolutely, the childcare piece. And then I think that adds to the anxiety that can be there. And, those transitions to school and daycare, we called it school too when mine were little. That transition is a big one. You add the transition in the middle of a pandemic, that's a different story.
As related to that, like they weren't letting anyone in the daycare or school whenever he started. That was part of the rules around the pandemic. So our first day, he'd never been away from us because my husband was working from home that whole time. He'd never been away from at least having one of us around ever. And we had to just drop him off with strangers at the front door. We had never set foot in the daycare. We'd done virtual tour and all that, but we just had to drop him off and walk, and that was it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking.
And how did
So,
you take care of yourself through that?
um, mostly just knowing that I think, I would have felt better going in, but I don't necessarily know that it would have made him feel any better because I would have had to leave eventually anyway. So I
Right.
think I told myself that a lot.
Right.
And also, it was reassuring for me when I was speaking to the school that they've actually found that kids have transitioned faster without parents going in for that reason, just in their
Right.
own experience, that
Right.
it is really hard. It's like ripping a band-aid off, and they
Yeah.
don't associate parents with school or whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not
Right. Right.
making stuff up, but
Yeah. Whatever
um,
we need to tell ourselves to get through it.
exactly.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and it was a very hard transition for him, though. And my son happened to get sick quite a bit, as you know. He
Yes.
was in and out of school a lot. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
And that's hard to transition when you're
yeah,
in and out. I found my kids even struggled with like a long weekend. They'd be
right.
like, oh, cool, we're home for like extra time. Now, like on a Tuesday, we don't want to go back to school. And so, yeah, that absolutely adds a big layer. It, minimizes greatly our village of support. Having to kind of pivot to like that online, more so online support and electronic support,
Yeah.
right? I had someone tell me today their baby is excited whenever she sees a phone because she thinks it's like, oh, people, you know?
Still the Skype jingle because he
Yeah,
gets excited about
right.
like grandmama's coming on the phone or whatever.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure he's not the only one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so if you could think about, what would you tell yourself, Sascha, in that time of great difficulty and experiencing that postpartum anxiety, if you could go back and talk to yourself, what would you tell yourself at that time?
I think we sort of touched on it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Trust yourself more.
yeah,
Stick to your values. Don't look at social media.
yeah,
Um, I think those are the most important things for me and the things I regret the most. Um, you know, this sounds really like cliche or whatever, but I was really afraid back then to hold my baby constantly. I felt like from every which angle, like either they're saying like hold your baby all the time or they're whatever, or don't hold your baby at all, or like all of this, whatever. And I wish I just trusted like, oh, I think this
mm,
is what he needs and just gone with it.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And then also again, I want to remind you, and then also remind people out there that you did come through it and you have come to this place where you know that you're the best mom for your son and you know what he needs and you're able to pick up on those cues.
Yeah.
That, yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Oh, of course. And so looking at, what supports do you think are still needed or maybe lacking that we need to kind of do better with in this space to support new parents?
Well, I think the most important thing that I think is still lacking is openness to talk about these things. Even with my closest friends and my sister-in-laws, and it's not comfortable to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think your local support, I don't know, lack of a better word,
Yeah.
is sometimes can be the most helpful. And I just don't feel like there's enough vulnerability, and there's too much fear in talking about it and stigma and everything still. Um, and then also, I don't know what prenatal care is like in Canada, but here, no one ever talked to me about it beforehand, gave me resources ahead of time, said like, hey, this might happen to you. And if it does, like, just keep this in your back pocket.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
I Absolutely. I hear that. And I totally agree. Even though we live in different countries, it's like
Mhm.
very similar experiences. Absolutely. That we don't actually in Canada, we don't have a national strategy for perinatal mental health. There is one in the States, but not one in Canada.
Hmm.
And so there's an amazing organization that is advocating for that, Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative. And so what that means is that OBGYNs or family doctors or anyone that comes in contact with someone who's having a baby or has had a baby, they don't have to screen for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders.
Mhm.
And they don't know how,
Right.
right? And so part of some work that I'm going to be doing is that advocacy piece. But we need that national strategy, but on a local level, yeah, we need to get people asking these things. How are you feeling?
Yeah.
Just if my doctor had asked me that at my 6-week session, at my 6-week appointment, I would have been like, terrible.
Right.
I'm not okay. Help
Right.
me,
Right.
you know? And so, yeah, I agree. We need to open up these discussions, talk more, talk,
Yeah.
right? Because there's so many of us that have had these experiences, and we don't know that there's so many other people that have had these experiences. Because, like you said, we're also uncomfortable about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sascha, so much for sharing your story. I think so many people are going to connect to so many different pieces of your story, and I think it's going to be really helpful for people.
No, thank you for talking to me, and thank you for
Yeah.
being for me through all of this.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was an honor, and it's still an honor. Thank you. Sascha's story is so relatable to so many of us. Even though we live in different countries and I had my babies many years before her, we have so many similarities in our experiences. It was also really interesting to talk about her experience of dealing with postpartum anxiety during a pandemic, how that added to her anxiety, and what that transition to childcare was like for her and her family as well. I'm so thankful to Sascha for sharing her story, and I hope that I can help listeners feel less alone. Please leave a comment and let me know how Sascha's story resonated with you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with any of your friends or family members who may benefit from it. If you feel you are experiencing any of the symptoms or issues that we discussed today, please reach out to any one of your supports. You can also go to perinatalwellbeing.ca for more information, blog posts, and podcast episodes. Check out our new episode every Wednesday.